In 1590, Antonio Pérez, once Secretary of State and the most powerful man in Spain after the king himself, crossed the border between Castile and Aragon in desperate flight. He had escaped from a Madrid prison where Philip II had kept him under torture on charge of treason. His destination? The Monastery of Santa María de Piedra, a Cistercian fortress operating under Aragonese law, which placed strict limits on royal authority. Its story begins nearly 4 centuries earlier, in 1195, when King Alfonso II of Aragon, known as the Chaste, granted the ancient Castrum Petrae, the Castle of Stone, along with its surrounding lands, to the Cistercian order as a daughter house of the Abbey of Poblet. A group of 13 monks, led by Abbot Gofredo, first settled at a site known as Piedra Vieja, before relocating in 1218 to their permanent home beside the Piedra River. The location was no accident. The monastery sat on the strategic frontier between the kingdoms of Aragon and Castile, a zone of permanent conflict that will leave a deep mark on its architectural character. It was precisely this frontier insecurity that drove the monk to develop a form of military Cistercian architecture unlike anything else of its kind. The enclosure wall, later remodeled in the 17th century, is reinforced by 7 semicircular towers positioned according to Vitruvian principles. Each one offers unobstructed sight lines along the curtain walls and optimal resistance against projectiles. Particularly remarkable is the 12th century gate tower, which served not only as a defense against bandits, but also housed the gatekeeper monk's dormitory and most unusually, a 15th century liturgical balcony. This balcony was used to display sacred relics, including the celebrated Sacro Dubio of Zymla, to the faithful who could not enter the sacred enclosure. It was an ingenious architectural solution. Pilgrims could venerate the relics without compromising the monastic cloister or the security of the complex. The Abbey Church, consecrated in 1218, is a notable example of early Gothic with influences from the Burgos school, distinguished by its self-supporting rib vaults that even today allow scholars to study 13th century structural engineering firsthand. For centuries, the monastery was a center of great wealth and influence, under the protection of kings including James I and Ferdinand the Catholic, who granted it commercial privilege and absolute jurisdiction over several towns. The community held an important scriptorium, and recent research into its bibliographic heritage has identified over 160 volumes from its library now dispersed across European institutions. Among the recovered treasures are a 15th century rule of Saint Benedict and the Lumen Domus Petrae of 1683, a comprehensive register of the monastery's archive. Santa María de Piedra also held artistic works of great value, among them the reliquary altar of 1390 made to house the Sacro Dubio of Zymla. It was this accumulation of power, privilege and legal autonomy that made the monastery such an attractive sanctuary when Antonio Pérez, once Philip's closest confidant, needed a place beyond the king's reach. The episode illustrates how far the monastery independence had grown. Not even the King of Spain could breach its walls without consequence. Yet the affair ultimately cost Aragon dearly. Juan de Lanuza, the Justicia of Aragon, barely 2 months into the role, was publicly executed as a direct result of sheltering Pérez. The message rang out across Spain. No ancient charter, however venerable, could stand against the crown. 1835 was a catastrophic year for Spanish heritage. The Mendizábal Decree, a sweeping disentailment law that expelled monks from hundreds of monasteries across the country to fund the Carlist Wars, reached Santa María de Piedra as well. The monks were driven out and the complex was systematically stripped. Organs, choir stalls, paintings, and objects of irreplaceable value were scattered or sold at public auction. For 5 years, the site lay abandoned, its roofs collapsing, its cloister overrun by vegetation, its remaining contents carried off by looters. It seemed destined to join the hundreds of ruins left across Spain in the wake of the disentailment. Then, in 1840, something unexpected happened. A Catalan industrialist named Pablo Muntadas purchased the entire complex for 1,250,000 reales. It was his son, Juan Federico Muntadas, a man of exceptional romantic sensibility, who proved to be the true visionary. He cleared the vegetation that had choked the Piedra river, built wooden walkways over the rock, installed metal footbridges, and created strategic viewpoints to make the waterfalls accessible. What millions of visitors today regard as pristine natural landscape is actually a carefully engineered 19th century intervention. The waterfalls were already there, but Muntadas domesticated them. He regulated the flow, cleared the pools, carved staircases into the rock, and distributed the water across the waterfalls to achieve the perfect and scenic effect. He transformed the monastery into Spain's first hotel spa, where aristocrats and the bourgeois came to take the waters, in a setting that blended medieval ruins with apparently untamed nature. In 1867, he went further still, founding within the grounds of Spain's first industrial fish hatchery 22 pools cut into the rock that eventually produced 80,000 trout a year, turning the site into a center of aquacultural innovation as well. Today, the Monastery of Piedra is a seamless fusion of historic heritage and overwhelming nature. It is a place where 13th century Cistercian architecture coexists with a 19th century romantic landscape. A destination where, as the Muntadas family used to say, nature does not merely enchant, it fascinates. The monastery survived not through the will of the state or the church, but through the vision of a family that saw something more than rubble in the ruins. They saw a future. That raised an uncomfortable question about heritage conservation. It is legitimate to radically transform a historic monument in order to guarantee its economical survival? Thousands of Spanish monasteries vanished after 1835. Piedra and thus because it stopped being a monument and became a business. Perhaps the lesson is that heritage does not survive on historical value alone. It survives on its capacity to reinvent itself. The Muntadas story is not an isolated case. The 19th century was full of men who used architecture and landscape to impose their own vision of a world slipping beyond their control. The most extreme example of that impulse was not a Catalan industrialist, but a Bavarian king who bankrupted himself building a castle he never intended to open to the public. You will find his story on our channel.